I told Taryn before service began, I said a month ago, God gave me this sermon. And then 2 weeks ago, Luke decided to preach the sermon. And then last week, Jared preached the sermon. So what I'm going to do is a sermon. And I'm just going to talk to myself. Y'all are here. I'm just talking to myself. Because if it's not for anybody, then it's for me. About a month ago, Taryn and I, we went to go see family in Atlanta, Georgia. And we got to go to a, whatever their baseball team is there. And I walked in, and it was a huge stadium. Thousands of people are in there. There's lots of things going on. Food's being served. People are going to find their seats. Tickets are being passed out. They're getting the game ready. And the game's going on. It's 95-degree heat in the city, and so it's hot. We don't have any heat. We don't have any shade. We don't have any AC. It's just miserable. And all these people are out there. I'm just like, wow, there's a lot of people. I would not be out here if it wasn't for my family. 95-degree heat. And so at one point we got up and we walked around and we're talking. We have the kids and all of a sudden you just hear this whole entire stadium go nuts. I was like, what in the world is going on over here? And the person walking by heard me and they said that somebody had just hit a home run. And I was like, oh, all right, that's cool, great. But the thought that went through my head besides that is that how many of these people know God? How many of these people go to church? And how many of these people don't worship like they do at a baseball game in church? How many people, they pass God off for a second course meal or a second hand-me-down. But when they go to a baseball game, they're excited because their person that they're rooting for got that home run, or that person made that touchdown, or they made that basketball goal. Tonight I'm going to talk about fans and followers. And I want to tell you about a story about a man and he had some friends. I went to this leader's home, and this leader back in this day invited him for a feast. It was a feast and relaxation. And when you get to this house, the leader is supposed to anoint your head with oil, and he is supposed to wash your feet, and he is supposed to kiss the guests on the cheek. This is obviously not America. America, we don't do that. But this is what happened back in that day, and not doing any of these things, or even one of these things, was a huge insult. If you didn't kiss the person on the cheek, you didn't wash their dirty feet, you didn't anoint their head with oil, you insulted not only yourself, but you insulted the guests that you invited into your home. The customs were obviously different than what you expect in America. When dinner was served, it was at a table that was low to the ground. You would lay. Can anybody imagine laying on the ground and just trying to eat? I can't picture that in my head. I never did that as a kid. I've never done it as an adult. But this is what happened back in that day. They had a table low to the ground, and you would lay with your head facing the table, and your feet would be sprawled out either behind you or to the side of you. And this is the scene we come on. The guests, they're all laying around the table when a stranger, an uninvited lady that's known to be a prostitute, she's known for her corruption, somehow comes into this house. This is not a house that you can just, in Van Austin, the doors are unlocked and you just walk into someone's house. This is a leader of this city's or this religion of that area's house. And so it should have guards around it. And she comes in somehow. She sees the leader of the guests, and she kneels down, and she begins to cry, and she begins to weep. And picture this with me, that maybe you're one of the leader's followers, and you're sitting at the table, and you notice out of the corner of your eye this lady coming in. You're like, oh, it could just be maybe a servant. It could be maybe another guest that's there. You don't really know. And then you see her getting down to where your leader is at, and you're just like, well, today's society, we'll be like, all right, where's my gun? Like, we got to protect my leader. What's going on here? And she gets down, and she has this bottle of perfume around her neck, and she begins to cry. A fan is defined as an enthusiastic devotee, a follower or admirer of a sport, a pastime, celebrity. A follower is defined as a person who imitates, copies, or takes as a model or idea. I don't know how to pronounce this Greek word, but I'm assuming it's akolutheo. To follow one who precedes, join him as his attendant, or to join as a disciple, become or be his disciple, to follow his precepts and instructions. That story takes place in Luke 7:37 through 39. And it says, and one of the Pharisees desired him, it's talking about Jesus, that would eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus was there, or when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. If you study this out, it approximately took 200 to 300 days to pay for this bottle of perfume. 200 to 300. Can you imagine working almost a year to pay for a bottle of perfume? She brings this bottle of perfumes in, and she stood at his feet behind him weeping. She comes humbly behind him, and I can imagine as she begins to try to pour the oil over him, and she's supposed to do it at his head, and she can't even make it to his head because she's just so humbled that the King of all the earth is in the same room. And she's there, and she realizes that's the presence of her Savior, and she's worthless. She's no good. She's should be in the slums and the gums, and she's just should be thrown to the wayside. In her mind, in her mentality, this is what's going on in it. And yet the leader doesn't say anything. Jesus doesn't say anything. In fact, later on, he rebukes those that do say something. And she begins to wash his feet with tears, and she wiped them with the hairs of her head, and she kissed his feet, and she anointed them with this ointment. And now when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, this man, if he were a prophet, because he again didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him, for she is a sinner. And again, he goes on to rebuke. But in this story, we see two very different types of people. We see a fan, the Pharisee. He doesn't care about the customs. He doesn't care about, I need to anoint Jesus' head. I need to anoint his feet with oil. I need to wash his feet. I need to kiss his cheek. He doesn't care about that. But then you see a lady that says, all I want is just to touch him. All I want is just to be in his presence. We live in a society that is increasing in speed. You look at technology, Matt, and if Jared was here, he could answer this. It's rapidly advancing. Items that literally only a few years ago were dreams are now becoming a reality. Knowledge itself is rapidly increasing. At one point, you'd call David for everything. David, how do you do this? He'd tell you how to do it. Now David's like, go look at YouTube. That's what it is. We have so much technology now. There's more archaeology and scientific evidence that's being discovered on a consistent basis that proves the Bible. But in so many cases, the church or so-called Christians have fallen asleep on matters that determine where a soul is going. Complacency and the desire to not offend anyone is rampant in the church. What was once called common sense is now missing. What was once considered wrong and is still by the Bible considered wrong is now embraced not just by the world, but by the religions of the world. Items that are now labeled that we stand up for and we preach against and we teach against because the Bible says it and science says it is now labeled as prejudice and racism. And yet to be a follower of God, we have to stand. Are you a fan or are you a follower? We have come from a society that knew sin and they were afraid to do sin and they would go after a permanent solution to try to fix it. To one where we come weeping at the altar and we say, God, I'm a sinner and I've done this and I've done that and please forgive me. And then we go outside of the church and we go back to what we were doing and we flirt with the world. The Bible indicates that this cannot happen. You cannot serve God and mammon. In Mark 7:6, and again, I'm just talking to myself, so I don't want to be this. But Jesus said unto them, well hath Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. When I worship God, or when I'm at my job at State Farm or Summit Productions, is what I'm saying and what I'm doing, is it reflecting my Savior, or is it reflecting what my culture surrounding me is showing? We have become both a culture that is desensitized and yet desperate. We're desperate to be known. We're desperate to be the center of attention. We're desperate to be popular to the point of compromising. We're desperate to have influence at our job or with our friends or with our family, that we forget that we have to have a relationship with God. We take a fan approach. It's a slow fade when you give your heart away. It's a slow fade when you begin to let go of some things, when you say, I don't have to raise my hands anymore. I don't have to praise God like that anymore. I don't have to dance like that anymore. It's okay. I don't have to do that, or to the point where we ask if God really created two genders. Our attention has become so coveted that we allow ourselves to listen to the devil when he's whispering in your ears and he begins to say, hey, Stephen, it's okay. A fan is the same thing as a follower. A fan is the exact same thing as a follower, but a fan, they'll cheer you on, but they won't try to act like you. A follower would try to become like you. You can act like a certain passable Christian, Stephen. You can talk or dress or maybe even have some of the standpoints on there, but you can still act like a fan. Galatians 1:6-10 says, I marvel that you are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another. He's saying they've called you into something else. They've called you into another doctrine. They've called you into another philosophy or truth, but it's not truth. There's one way, there's one truth, there's one light, there's one God. But there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. And he goes on to reinforce what he's stating to them. He says, but though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you, let him be accursed. And again, he emphasizes it, as we said unto you, or so say now again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than that ye have received, let him be accursed. For do I now persuade men or God, or do I seek to please men? For if I yet please man, I should not be the servant of Christ. When you're going to work and you're trying to figure out how to move on with the work day, and believe me, it can be frustrating at work. Do I look at what my coworkers are doing and my job and my boss and say, okay, I could probably do this, but it compromises my standpoint on God? Or do I stand firm regardless of it? Let's put it like this. You cannot live for God and the world at the same time. You cannot live in sin and live for God. It's not possible. It's not feasible. We do things in love. We do things in charity, but we are not to compromise on what the Bible declares. Galatians 5:16-17 says, this I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to another. They cannot exist or coincide, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would. In Galatians 6:7-8, it says, be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that he also shall reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall the Spirit reap corruption. What are you sowing in your life? Matthew 5:17-19 says, for do you not understand that whatsoever entereth in the mouth of the belly, entereth in at the mouth, goeth in the belly, and is cast out into the draught. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man. What are you speaking? When you're at work, when you're with your friends, when you're by yourself and you're not around church people, what are you like? What am I, again, what is Stephen like? Am I acting the way that I do at church? Am I acting like I should as a Christian? Am I behaving and following the precepts and the patterns and the statutes that God has given to me? Or am I flirting with the world and yet maybe in my mind holding on to Jesus? You cannot do both. I ask you today, who knows your name? Because fans, you can go up to your star that you're following or that person on that list that you've written down, and they're like, hey, I'm your biggest fan. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, cool. And moving on. Don't know you. So who knows your name? What does your story say about you? If we were to read about my story, which I would not want people to read my story, it's boring. What would be the conclusion? What would people say about me? If somebody could write a one-line sentence about my life, what would it say? What would people from work say? What would people from just my friends that aren't at work say? Let's look at another story. You look at a common story in the Gospels, and it's about the 10 virgins. 5, they're prepared. They're ready to go for their groom, and the 5 are not. They're slacking, really, is what they are. And they get the notification on, nowadays technology, you just forget about the bell ringing. I got a notification. The groom's coming. The groom's coming. He's coming. And the 5 are excited, and the 5 are ready to go, and they stand up, and they're like, all right, we're ready. We're going to do this. And the 5 that are not prepared, the 5 fans that forget their oil, they don't prepare in time. They go and they ask the 5 wise virgins, please let us have some of your oil. Please let's have some of your oil. No, absolutely not. We're not doing that. Go buy your own. And they go running, and I can imagine them banging on the doors as they're going down the street, banging on doors, knocking and asking, do you have any oil? Do you have any oil that I can have, that you can spare? Because the groom is coming. And finally, after what seems like an eternity to them, they finally find a buyer that's still open, and they get that oil. And they run back to where the groom was supposed to meet them at. The groom's out there, the 5 wise ones aren't there, and they don't know where to go, and they finally figure it out. And they get to where the groom's at, and his response is, I don't know you. I don't know you. I know these ones that were followers of me. I know these ones that listened to me, and they listened to the notifications, and they listened to be prepared and ready and were steadfast in their approach, but I don't know you. Why are you following Jesus? Is it for self-gain? Is it for the fact that you love him? What is the status relationship with God? Is it sick? Is it healthy? Is it growing? Is it dying? Is it dead or it's living? It's not both. It literally, physically, and spiritually cannot be both. It's one or the other. In the face of massive prolonged odds, do you still worship God? You look at the disciples, all but John died. All of them died. And John was put on an island the rest of his life. Never to leave the island. Do you stand firm with God, or do you allow the things of the world to influence you? Do you evaluate yourself against others, or are you comparing yourself to God? I learned a long time ago, don't compare yourself to others. There's someone always better than you in things. Like videography or drone flying for my company. There is always someone better out there. There is always somebody that has more money, more talent, more ability. For those that don't know, I own a drone company, and there are lots of drones out there that are really cool to have. They are very expensive. I don't have that money, but there's always somebody better. So stop comparing yourself to the person next to you, but compare yourself to what God is telling you to compare yourself to. If you notice throughout the New Testament, Jesus and his followers were constantly fighting against their tradition of Judaism. They were constantly fighting against, not the biblical teachings, but they were fighting against the tradition that the religious leaders had come up with. When there was a law, the religious leaders would say, hey, okay, to make sure that we don't break this law, we're going to add 3 rules to that. So all y'all that wear white, including me, you can't even have a shade of white on there. If it's even close to white, you can't even have it on there. You can't wear it. That's in essence what they were doing back in that day. And that was a fight that Jesus and his disciples were waging, or one of the fights, against the religious rulers. And you may say, Stephen, what's the danger with being a fan? What's the danger with it? Well, I can always, I got time. Luke, you're young, right? You got 70, 90 years ahead of you, hopefully, right? You got a long time. Any time during that time, you can become a follower. But Matthew and Mark, they both say, and you see it in Revelations, and you see it in Paul's epistles when he's writing to the church, that nobody knows when God's coming back. We just know it's happening. It says no man knows the hour. They don't know the time. Do we really, Luke, want to be playing that guessing game? Do you really want to put it on the fence and say, okay, I can be a fan today, and I'll go be a follower when Sunday happens? I'll be a follower Tuesday when we have prayer at church, and Wednesday when we have our Wednesday small groups, but the rest of the week I'll just be a fan. I'll just act like a Christian, but internally I'm not going to be doing it. When did we lose our desperation or anguish for those around us? When was the last time, not at church, but at home or driving somewhere, where we were so moved with the souls around us or the vehicles around us or the accident scene that we come upon, and there's a fatality there, and we say, God, there's a soul that's going somewhere, and there's other souls that are impacted, and we begin to weep and we begin to cry. When was the last time that we became a follower and we moved that way? According to a 2022 study by the Pew Research Center, 63% of Americans identify as Christians. In 1990, it was 90% of Americans. You couldn't go anywhere or drop a pin, according to this research, that you wouldn't find at least most everybody associating themselves as a Christian. In 2014, it was 76%. We are declining at a rapid pace because people would rather be followers and identify as Christians than actually be a follower of Christ and be what a true Christian should be. Fans often confuse their admiration for devotion. They mistake their knowledge of Jesus for intimacy with Jesus. You look at the Pharisees and you look at the Sadducees, and they knew everything down to the dot of an I, the crossing of a T, of when Jesus would be here and the prophecies that surrounded it. There's 300. And they knew all these things about him. But when Jesus stood in their midst and said, I am he, you ain't him. No way. You're not Jesus. And they confused it. Fans assume their good intentions make up their apathetic or little to no emotion or concern about something faith. One of the core symptoms of fandom is that fans always consider themselves to be followers, but they're not followers. You look at the rich man and the lady who gave the 2 mites, and she comes in, and if you don't know what a mite is, it's literally half a penny. Like a cut up penny, I'll show you. And she comes in, and I could think of when Jared was preaching last week, and he talks about the publican, and he says, God, I'm not worthy. And you see the Pharisee next to him and saying, God, thank you for making me not like him. Thank you for putting me in this position. And you see this little lady, and she just has half a penny. And she drops it in there, and Jesus says she gave more than all the people that came in here because she gave what she couldn't give. She didn't have anything to give, and she still gave it. And these rich men gave out of their abundance and out of their prosperness. And she's just saying, if it's all I have to give and it will let me reach God, then I'm going to give everything I have if I'm going to be able to get him. The cost is great to become a follower. In Mark 8:34-38, it says, and when he had called the people unto him, talking about Jesus, with his disciples also, he said unto them, whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it. But whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his own soul? Whosoever. And this part, again, talking to me, terrifies me. Therefore shall be ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation. Of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed. If I ignore God, if I ignore the teachings, and I ignore the preachings, and I just play a fan the whole entire time, I don't know you, is what he's saying. When he cometh in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Living for Jesus requires sacrifice. It will require hardships, but it will be some of the most amazing moments in your life that you will ever get to experience. We're going to wrap up here in just a minute, but let me give you a couple more stories. You look at the disciples, you look at the 12 spies. They're sent into the promised land, and these 12 spies are made not just of some Joe off the block. They're made out of the chiefs of these tribes. And God tells them, go spy the land, bring us back a report. We want to hear what it is. And 10 of these leaders, again, not just some person off the road that they just sent off into the promised land, comes back and they tell their people, they're like, you don't want to do this. This is messed up. There's bad people in there. They're bigger than we are. They're stronger than we are. They got fortresses. We cannot go in here and conquer. And 10, Caleb and Joshua, they give a good report. And you look it up and you find out that for every day they searched, every day, 40 days they searched the land, God said you're going to spend a year in the wilderness. For every day, their child will suffer because of their unwillingness to become followers and stop living the lifestyle of fans. For every day they searched, they would be reminded if only they had trusted in God and followed God, they would have been in the promised land. 1 Peter 1:24 says, for all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man as a flower of grass. The grass withereth, and the flower thereof falleth away. One day, everything we see here is going to fade. It's going to fade. And we can either choose to be a fan or we can choose to be a follower. And Kara, I'm wrapping it up if you want to come. And as we do wrap it up, I want to bring you back again to that story of the lady at the beginning where she comes in and she's desperate and she needs Jesus and she's willing to do whatever it takes to get to Jesus, because who knows if there were armed guards that were protecting them and potentially arrest that might happen to her because she came into this Pharisee's home. And Charles Spurgeon, he was a British preacher in the 1800s, I believe it was. And he says, it ought not to astonish you that there were two persons whose intense affection thus displayed itself. The astonishment should rather be that there were not 200 who did so. For the anointing of the feet of an honored friend, loved as Jesus deserved to be, the marvel is that he was not oftener visited with these generous tokens of human love. Or in other words, it should not astonish us that at least two people went and performed the work that they should have done to worship Jesus. But what should astonish us is that the fact that there weren't hundreds of people running to Jesus and willing to wash the feet of Jesus. Your decision to worship, like Luke said 2 weeks ago, could be the catalyst or the point of revival in your world. Your decision to make a conscious effort from being a fan to being a follower can change everything. I've been talking to myself tonight, but I want to ask y'all a question. Are you willing to be a follower? Are you willing to drop everything and pursue God? Those that might watch this on YouTube or Facebook, Instagram when we put it out, are you willing to be a follower? Are you willing to make the sacrifice to become a follower of God? To grow a tree, you have to plant a seed. That's obvious. But the seed must die first. Are you willing to die so you can grow? Are you willing to shut off your old self so you become a new creature? When was the last time that you were gripped with anguish for a soul? When was the last time that we wept over Van Alstyne? Or we wept over Grayson County? There's thousands that are moving in this area. There are thousands upon thousands that are moving to Anna and Sherman and even Van Alstyne. And when was the last time that we cried over all these souls that are within our reach? When was the last time that we were moved with such compassion that that person in the line that God said, go talk to them, that we went and talked to them? When was the last time I was moved or you were moved to talk to your coworker and friend about God? Because you might not know that you might be moving to a new department in 1 month and you might lose that contact with them, never to see them again. These altars are open if you want to find a place to pray. But there are people that are going to hell all around us, and we have the decision that we have to make if we're going to become a fan, or if we're going to be a follower, or if we're going to intercede for the souls that are around us, or if we're just going to let them go into hell without any stopping them. Again, will you be a fan or a follower?